There comes a moment in the soul's journey when something profound begins to shift. Not the sudden crack of lightning that splits the sky, but the gentle settling of sediment that has been swirling in turbulent waters for far too long. You may not notice it at first, this great quieting that begins to take place within the chambers of your being. The world around you continues its relentless symphony of urgency and noise, but somewhere deep within the sacred architecture of your psyche, a different rhythm begins to emerge. This is not the numbness that comes from overwhelm, nor the resignation that follows defeat. This is something altogether more mysterious and infinitely more powerful. It is the soul's recognition of its own natural frequency, that deep, resonant tone that has always been there, humming beneath the cacophony of external demands and internal reactivity. For perhaps the first time in your adult life, you begin to experience what the ancient wisdom traditions have always known. That true peace is not the absence of storm, but the discovery of the unshakable ground upon which all storms pass. The ego, that faithful servant of survival and social acceptance, may initially interpret this settling as a kind of death, where once you felt compelled to react to every provocation, to engage with every drama, to oscillate wildly between the poles of elation and despair. Now there is simply presence, a vast, encompassing awareness that watches the world's theater with neither judgment nor investment. The ego whispers its familiar warnings. You're becoming apathetic, you're losing your edge, you're no longer fully alive. But the deeper wisdom that is awakening knows better. This great settling is actually the emergence of your authentic self, that eternal aspect of your being that has been patiently waiting for the dust of experience to finally come to rest. Like an ancient lake that has endured centuries of storms, your consciousness begins to reveal its true depth and clarity. The muddy waters of reactivity, which once clouded every perception and colored every response, slowly clear to reveal the luminous bottom of your being. You may find yourself standing in the middle of conversations that once would have triggered automatic responses: anger at injustice, anxiety about the future, excitement about possibilities, and instead discovering a profound stillness that neither rejects nor clings to what is unfolding. This is not indifference. It is the most exquisite form of presence imaginable. You are becoming like the mountain that remains unmoved by the weather patterns that dance across its face, offering shelter and perspective to all who approach, while maintaining its essential nature regardless of season or circumstance. The settling brings with it a strange kind of homesickness, not for any particular place or time, but for this state of being that feels both completely foreign and utterly familiar. You realize you have been away from yourself for a very long time, caught up in the elaborate drama of becoming someone the world could understand and approve of. But now, in this great quieting, you are remembering what it feels like to simply be, without agenda or performance, without the exhausting effort of maintaining a persona that never quite fit anyway. This is the beginning of what Jung called individuation, not the ego's project of self-improvement, but the self's mysterious process of becoming what you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and expectation. The settling is sacred work, even when it feels like nothing is happening, especially when it feels like nothing is happening. For in the stillness, the soul is finally free to rearrange itself according to its own deeper logic, its own inherent wisdom, its own perfect timing. Welcome to the great settling. Trust its rhythm. Honor its pace. Allow yourself to sink into the depths of your own being, like a stone finding its resting place at the bottom of a clear, still pond. What the world calls stagnation, the soul recognizes as the profound peace that comes when consciousness finally stops running and discovers it has arrived at the destination It was always seeking the eternal home of its own authentic nature. As this great settling deepens, you begin to notice something extraordinary happening to the very fabric of your being. Your consciousness, once so easily hijacked by the world's endless parade of crises and celebrations, begins to stabilize at a frequency that feels both ancient and utterly new. It's as if you were a radio that had been trapped between stations for years, picking up nothing but static and interference, and suddenly, with barely a whisper of adjustment, you find yourself tuned to a station that broadcasts from somewhere beyond the ordinary spectrum of human noise. This is the electromagnetic shift, and it changes everything about how you move through the world. The news that once sent adrenaline coursing through your veins now seems to emanate from a distant planet. Social media, with its carefully curated outrage and manufactured urgency, feels like observing the mating rituals of a species you no longer belong to. The gossip that once felt like vital intelligence about the human condition now sounds like the chattering of birds in a language you've somehow forgotten how to speak. But this is not disconnection. It is the deepest form of connection imaginable. You are tuning into the frequency of your own soul, that eternal broadcast that has been transmitting your true purpose, your authentic nature, your deepest wisdom all along. The world has not changed. Your capacity to receive its more subtle communications has been dramatically enhanced. Like a musician who has spent years playing in a discordant orchestra and suddenly realizes they can hear their own instrument with perfect clarity, you begin to understand the difference between noise and music, between reaction and response, between the voice of the world and the voice of the self. This electromagnetic transformation creates the strangest sensation of existing in two worlds simultaneously. Your physical form continues to move through the familiar landscapes of daily life. You still buy groceries, still navigate traffic, still exchange pleasantries with colleagues, but energetically, you have relocated to an entirely different dimension of experience. You are participating in the dance of form while remaining anchored in the formless, engaging with the temporal while dwelling in the eternal. Others may sense this shift before you fully understand it yourself. They might comment that you seem different somehow, more present but less available, more peaceful but less predictable. Some will be drawn to this new frequency like flowers turning towards the sun, sensing something they cannot name but desperately need. Others will feel inexplicably uncomfortable in your presence, as if your stillness is highlighting their own inner turbulence in ways they are not ready to acknowledge. The electromagnetic shift reveals the profound truth that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but transmitted through it. You are not becoming less human. You are becoming more authentically human by remembering that humanity itself is a temporary costume worn by something far more vast and luminous. The frequency you are stabilizing into is not otherworldly. It is the deepest, most natural frequency of this world, the harmonic undertone that has always been present beneath the surface chaos. This is why the world's noise begins to feel so foreign. You are no longer vibrating in sympathy with collective anxiety, manufactured outrage, or the endless cycle of stimulation and numbness that characterizes so much of modern existence. Instead, you have found your way back to the original song, the one that was playing when you first arrived in this body, the one that will still be playing long after this particular incarnation has returned to the elements from which it came. And so begins the death of drama, not the sudden collapse of a building, but the quiet abandonment of a theater, where you have been performing the same exhausting plays for decades. The archetypal roles that once felt so essential to your sense of identity, the victim who gathered sympathy, the hero who rescued others from their darkness, the persecutor who maintained order through control, begin to feel like costumes from a production you can no longer remember auditioning for. This is perhaps the most disorienting aspect of the transformation, because drama has been your compass for so long. It told you when to feel, how much to feel, and what your feelings meant in the grand narrative of your existence. Crisis provided purpose, conflict created intimacy, and chaos offered the intoxicating illusion that you were fully alive. But now, as you settle deeper into your authentic frequency, these familiar patterns begin to reveal themselves as elaborate distractions from something far more substantial and enduring. The death of drama is not the death of feeling. It is the birth of authentic emotion that arises from presence rather than story. You discover that there is a vast difference between the manufactured intensity that comes from engaging with external conflicts and the quiet fire that burns when consciousness meets itself without mediation. The former exhausts, the latter nourishes. The former depends on others to provide the fuel. The latter burns with the inexhaustible energy of the self. You may find yourself in the middle of situations that would have once sent you spiraling into familiar emotional patterns, only to discover that the hook simply isn't there anymore. The comment that would have triggered defensiveness passes through you like wind through an open window. The crisis that would have activated your savior complex is met with presence and appropriate response, rather than compulsive reaction. The injustice that would have consumed you with righteous anger is acknowledged and addressed without the ego's need to make it a personal crusade. This transformation can be profoundly unsettling for those around you who have grown accustomed to your participation in the collective theater of human drama. Family members may try to re-engage you in familiar conflicts, testing whether the old buttons still work. Friends may interpret your newfound equanimity as indifference or superiority. Colleagues may find your calm presence disturbing in environments that thrive on urgency and reactivity. But what is dying is not your capacity for engagement. It is your addiction to the adrenaline of emotional chaos. What is being born is something infinitely more powerful, the ability to respond rather than react, to participate without being consumed, to care deeply without being destroyed by what you cannot control. This is the fruit of individuation, not the ego's project of becoming someone special, but the self's natural expression of what you have always been, beneath the layers of conditioned response. The enantiodromia is complete, where once you sought meaning through the intensity of dramatic experience, you now discover meaning in the profound stillness that underlies all movement. Where once you felt most alive in the eye of the storm, you now recognize that the eye itself, that place of perfect calm at the center of all chaos, is your true home. This death is not a loss but a liberation. You are being freed from the exhausting obligation to make every experience into a story, every emotion into an event, every moment into a meaning that must be defended or explained. In the space that opens when drama dies, something far more authentic can finally be born. The simple, radical presence of a consciousness that no longer needs external validation to know its own worth. As this transformation deepens, you begin to notice that your relationship with other people is undergoing a fundamental shift that feels both necessary and heartbreaking. The social environments that once energized you, the dinner parties where ideas sparked like flint against steel, the gatherings where laughter and conversation flowed like wine, now feel like entering a room filled with static electricity. The very air seems to crackle with an energy that is somehow hostile to the delicate frequency you have worked so hard to cultivate and protect. This is the emergence of the Hermit archetype, but not the Hermit of popular imagination. Bitter, misanthropic, rejecting the world out of hurt or fear. This is the sacred Hermit, the one who withdraws not from hatred of humanity, but from fierce love of the inner climate that has taken so long to establish. Like a gardener who has spent years preparing the soil for rare and delicate seeds, you find yourself naturally gravitating toward the conditions that allow your authentic nature to take root and flourish. The shift is subtle at first. Invitations that once excited you begin to feel like intrusions. Conversations that once stimulated you start to feel like performances where everyone is reciting lines from scripts they learned long ago but no longer believe in. You watch people you care about deeply engaging in familiar patterns of complaint, competition, and distraction, and while your love for them remains unchanged, your capacity to participate in these rituals begins to wane like the moon entering its dark phase. This can be profoundly isolating because the withdrawal is not a choice made by the ego, but a natural movement of the soul toward its own preservation and protection. You may find yourself sitting in rooms full of people you love, feeling like an anthropologist observing the customs of a tribe you once belonged to but can no longer claim as your own. The language they speak is still familiar, but it no longer carries the emotional charge it once did. Their concerns, while valid, feel like echoes from a life you lived in another century. The hermit frequency is not about superiority or judgment. It is about resonance. Just as certain plants can only thrive at specific altitudes and in particular soil conditions, your evolving consciousness requires an environment that supports rather than depletes the delicate work of inner transformation. The noise of social engagement, which once felt like the music of human connection, now feels like interference, preventing you from hearing the subtle communications that flow between your conscious and unconscious minds. This withdrawal can be misunderstood by others as aloofness, depression, or even arrogance. They may take your absence personally, interpreting your need for solitude as rejection of their company or judgment of their choices. But the hermit knows that this phase of the journey is not about them. It is about the sacred responsibility to protect the inner flame that has finally begun to burn with its own light rather than reflecting the fires of others. In solitude, you discover treasures that were impossible to find in the company of others. The subtle voice of intuition, which was once drowned out by external opinions and expectations, begins to speak with clarity and authority. The creative impulses that were once shaped by the need for approval or understanding begin to emerge in their pure, unfiltered form. The questions that arise in silence are different from the questions that arise in conversation. Deeper, more personal, more directly connected to the mystery of your own becoming. This is not permanent exile, but necessary incubation. Like the caterpillar that must dissolve completely in the darkness of the chrysalis before it can emerge as the butterfly, you are entering a phase where the old forms of connection must die so that new, more authentic forms of relating can be born. And then, in the depths of this sacred solitude, the final transformation reveals itself, not as another stage to be achieved, but as the recognition of what has always been present, waiting patiently beneath the surface turbulence of becoming. You discover yourself embodying what the mystics have called the eternal witness, that unchanging awareness that has been observing every drama, every crisis, every moment of joy and sorrow throughout your entire existence, completely unmoved by any of it. This is not the detachment born of trauma, where the psyche protects itself by numbing or dissociating from experience. This is not the philosophical detachment that comes from intellectual understanding of impermanence. This is something altogether more mysterious and infinitely more alive, the natural state of consciousness that has completed its primary work of integration and now rests in its own essential nature like a river that has finally reached the sea. The world continues its endless symphony of noise, but something fundamental has shifted in your relationship to it. The sounds still reach your ears. The events still unfold before your eyes. The emotions of others still register in your awareness, but they no longer penetrate the sacred chamber where your true self resides. You have become like a mountain whose peak remains forever untouched by the weather patterns that dance across its slopes, offering perspective and shelter to all who approach, while maintaining its essential nature regardless of season or storm. The paradox becomes exquisitely clear. This profound calm is not a retreat from life, but the deepest possible engagement with life itself. Life with a capital L that includes but transcends the small dramas of personality and circumstance. You realize you have never been more present, never been more aware, never been more intimately connected to the pulse of existence than you are in this state of perfect equanimity. What others might interpret as aloofness or superiority is actually the most refined form of love imaginable, the love that sees without needing to fix, that cares without needing to carry, that participates without needing to control outcomes. This sacred calm becomes a kind of medicine for a world that has forgotten its own natural rhythm. Without speaking a word, without making any effort to teach or heal or influence, your very presence begins to affect the atmosphere around you. People sense something in your stillness that they cannot name but recognize at the deepest level of their being, the peace that they too are seeking, the home that they too are trying to remember how to find. The journey that began with the great settling now reveals its ultimate purpose. You have not become too calm for the world. You have become calm enough to hold the world without being shaken by it. The noise continues its endless performance, but for you it has become like the sound of rain on a distant roof, acknowledged but not absorbed, heard but not heeded, present but not penetrating the sanctuary that you have discovered within yourself. In this recognition, something profound occurs. The one who once sought meaning through engagement with external chaos now becomes a living demonstration that another way of being is possible. The seeker who spent years searching for peace in all the wrong places becomes the finder who embodies that peace so completely that others are reminded of their own deepest nature simply by being in your presence. This is the ultimate gift of individuation, not to escape the world, but to live in it so completely, so authentically, so peacefully, that the world itself begins to remember what it was like before it forgot how to be still. You have become too calm for the world's noise, not because you have rejected the world, but because you have finally found your proper relationship to it as the eternal witness whose very presence reminds all of existence that beneath the surface chaos there has always been and will always be perfect peace. Having discovered this unshakable foundation of inner stillness, consciousness begins what may seem like a paradox, the return journey to the world of form. But this is not the same being who once fled from noise and chaos in search of peace. This is not the overwhelmed soul who withdrew from life because it could not handle the intensity of human experience. This is the sacred wanderer returning from the mountain peak, carrying invisible treasures that can only be earned through the long journey into the depths of one's own being. The calm that once felt like separation from life now reveals itself as the deepest possible intimacy with existence itself. You understand now that this is not the calm of the sedated, who have numbed themselves to avoid feeling, nor the calm of the indifferent, who have given up caring about the fate of the world. This is the calm of the ancient oak tree that bends gracefully with the storm while remaining rooted in something deeper than weather, deeper than season, deeper than the endless cycles of growth and decay that characterize all temporal existence. The world still presents its endless parade of urgencies, tragedies, and manufactured crises. The news still broadcasts its daily diet of outrage and fear. Social media still churns out its carefully crafted stimulations designed to capture and fragment attention. But these phenomena now appear to you like waves on the surface of an ocean whose depths remain forever undisturbed. You have discovered the difference between the surface storms and the profound stillness that exists in the depths, and you have learned to navigate from that deeper place. This transformation creates a fascinating phenomenon in your interactions with others. You discover that your soul has learned to distinguish with precision between response and reaction, between appropriate action that arises from wisdom and compulsive behavior that arises from unintegrated emotion. When engagement is called for, when life presents situations that genuinely require your participation, you find that action arises naturally from the stillness, rather than from the ego's desperate need to be important, relevant, or needed. People begin to seek out your presence without fully understanding why. There is something magnetically attractive about authentic peace, something that the human psyche recognizes as its own lost birthright, even when the mind cannot articulate what it is encountering. They may say things like, "I feel calmer when I'm around you," or "There's something different about your energy," or "I can't explain it, but I feel more myself in your presence." They are responding to the frequency of integrated consciousness, the rare vibration of a being who has made peace with both the light and shadow aspects of existence. But the shadow of this development must also be acknowledged with compassion and honesty. There can be a genuine grief that accompanies this transformation, a mourning for the intensity that once felt like life itself. The ego, that faithful guardian of survival and identity, may protest that without its familiar agitations and dramas, existence has become too quiet, too distant from the vivid emotional roller coaster that once provided such compelling meaning. This grief is natural and necessary. You are mourning the death of a version of yourself that, while ultimately limiting, was also familiar and in many ways precious. The one who felt everything so intensely, who was moved to tears by injustice and transported by beauty, who lived in the constant anticipation of the next emotional peak or valley. This being deserves to be honored even as it transforms into something more stable and enduring. When this grief is met with the same compassionate presence you have learned to bring to all experience, it transforms into something unexpected: gratitude for what has been transcended, and genuine excitement for what is yet to be discovered in the vast, largely unexplored territories of inner space. You realize that you have not lost your capacity for feeling, you have refined it. You have not become less human, you have become more authentically human by discovering the eternal dimension that gives meaning to the temporal experience. The sacred return is complete when consciousness realizes a truth that transforms everything. You never actually left the world. You simply found your proper relationship to it. The noise continues its endless performance, but it no longer has the power to disturb the sanctuary within. The calm has become not a shield against life, but a foundation for living more fully, more authentically, more compassionately than ever before. This is the final gift of becoming too calm for the world's noise, the discovery that true engagement with life requires the unshakable peace that can only be found in the silence beneath all sound. You have become a bridge between worlds, carrying the frequency of deep peace into environments that have forgotten what stillness feels like, offering through your simple presence a reminder that another way of being is not only possible, but infinitely more nourishing than the alternative.